Welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing another dinosaur. I've had a lot of you guys want a T-Rex, so today we are going to be making a T-Rex. Now originally I was going to make a full-on adult T-Rex, but as I was making it, it kind of started looking a little bit more childlike. So it's still going to be kind of realistic, but it's going to be a baby T-Rex. Also, I'm not going to be doing the more up-to-date version of what they believe T-Rex looks like. I'm going to be doing the type that has been seen in movies, kind of in the 90s and stuff like that, so it doesn't have feathers, more like a Jurassic Park version. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so I think the first thing that we're going to work on is going to be the clay head, and then we'll work on the clay little arms and feet. So making the T-Rex's head is going to be very similar to how I do my raptors. The only thing is I'm going to be starting off with making it a little bit more bulky. So like always, I'm going to start with a tinfoil base. I've got it roughly shaped into the idea of what I want the head to look like, and I'm going to completely cover this in clay and smooth everything out. Once I have everything smoothed out, I'm going to take my thumbs and my fingers and I'm going to kind of push in where I want the face to kind of sink in a little bit. So I'm going to mark those areas out and just push in a little bit and make sure to keep everything nice and smooth. Now I'm going to try something a little bit different with the style of the eyes. I kind of want to go for really tiny eyes to kind of emphasize the size of the head and make it look a little bit more bulbous. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some simple black glass beads and I'm going to push them in where I want the eyes, and then just like always with the eyes, I'm going to take strips of clay and start framing around them to make the eyelids. I'm going to use my tool to kind of blend everything in and add a slight texture to it. While I'm doing this, I want to make it look like the eye is slightly sunken in, at least the portion around the eye. So after I get the texture to the skin, I'm going to take some larger strips of clay and kind of frame around the base of the eye. And basically, I'm defining the bone above and under the eyes. I'm going to make sure that is nice and even. I'm going to lay it out, push it in, and start blending it into the rest of the clay. After that, I realized that I made the face a little bit too short, so I'm going to start adding some clay to the front of the snout area and start blending that in and shaping it to go with the rest of the face. After that, I'm going to take one of my tools to scratch out where I want the mouth to go, so I'm just kind of roughly drawing where I want it to be, and then we're going to make some teeth. So I'm going to take little balls of clay and I'm going to kind of roll them into a cone and place them onto the face where I want them. After I have those in place, I'm going to refine the shape of them, and then I'm going to take a strip of clay to make the upper lip. I'm going to lay that out on the line that we drew for the mouth, and I'm going to blend it in upwards. After that, we need to define where the nostrils are going to go, so I'm going to take a tool and I'm just going to kind of push in and then define the shape of them. I'm going to make a few last minute adjustments to the shape of the face, add a little bit clay here and there, take some away, and just make sure that I like the shape of it, and then we can start adding some texture. So for the texture, obviously we need to make a scaling texture, but we don't want to do the same scales throughout. It would kind of make the face look a little bit plain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add different types of scaling throughout the different portions of the face. So for instance, with the mouth, I'm going to make some ridges going along the lips, and then I'm going to break that up into individual scales, and then closer around the eyes are going to be smaller scales, so we're just going to make a kind of a wrinkly texture and different things like that, and then we can add some larger scales to maybe go on top of the head, and just kind of mess around with how we want the face to look. Honestly, once you have the basic shape of the head down and you're really happy with it, it looks nice and even and everything, adding the texture is a lot of fun. I kind of like to think of it as almost drawing, because you're kind of like scribbling all over the surface of something, and it's a lot of fun. Anyways, once you're done adding all the texture and you're happy with the look of your face and you don't want to touch it anymore, it's time to put it in the oven. So I'm going to clean up the edges around the base of it and get it ready to go in the oven. So we're going to probably bake this for probably about 45 to 55 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And while that's baking, we can start working on the hands and feet. For the hands and feet, I made some very simple wire frames for them ahead of time. These are made with a 14 and a 20 gauge wire. And we're just going to be using these kind of like the skeleton of the clay pieces. That way it has a bit of support and we have something to work off of. So I think since the little arms are so simple, we're going to get those out of the way first, and then we're going to work on the really large back legs. Now, even though our hands are really tiny, I still don't want to bump any of the claws once we have them put on, so I'm going to add a little bit of clay to the ends of the wire, shape them into claws, and then we're going to do a pre-bake. So I'm going to put it in just for like 15 minutes at the normal 275 Fahrenheit. And then once those are out of the oven and have cooled to touch, we can start adding clay to the rest of the frame. So I'm going to start with the under portion of the hands, and we're just going to add some strips of clay and blend those together, and it's basically going to look like one strip of clay that forks off into two different fingers. And then once we have the clay laid out on the bottom portion of the hand, we can start working on the top. Now normally when I do clay feet and hands, I tend to pre-bake in between doing the top and bottom portion, just to kind of save my progress, because it just makes it a lot easier and you don't have to worry about bumping it. You're welcome to do that with something this small, but I didn't really feel it was necessary, so I kind of just skipped the pre-bake and I went straight to adding scales to the tops of the hands. And then after that, these are going to bake for probably about 30 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. You're also welcome to wait and bake these when we have the feet done. Now for the feet, other than worrying about how they look, we need to worry about how much they weigh, because sadly we need to use a lot of clay on these because we need to counteract the weight of the head so it can actually stand up. Because if we make the legs too light and the head is too heavy, it's gonna fall on its face. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a large ball of clay to build everything off of. So this is going to go right at the middle of the foot where all the wires combined, and then I'm going to start adding some claws to the frame. Once we have all the claws in place, we're going to do a pre-bake, this time probably about 25 minutes, normal temperatures 275 Fahrenheit, and then once it's out of the oven and is cooled, we can start working on the bottoms of the feet. Now for the bottoms of the feet, normally I do strips of clay, but because I want the toes to be kind of chunky, I'm going to use balls of clay that are kind of rolled out into ovals. So I'm going to lay those out and I'm going to get everything blended together, and then I'm going to take a large strip of clay, and this is going to be the back portion of the leg. I'm going to make sure to blend that in as well, and then if you want to add a texture, you can add a texture, and then we can put this in the oven for probably another 35-45 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. And then once that's done baking, cools to touch, we can start working on the tops of the feet and finishing everything up. Now the fronts of the feet are going to be done very similar to how we did the hands, except before we add the scaling, I need to add a layer of clay first to define the shape of the foot. So I'm going to add some strips of clay and get everything covered and blended into the rest of the foot, and then we can take little balls of clay and start layering them going up the leg. Basically just like we did with the hands, except afterwards I'm probably going to add a texture to them because these scales are large enough where I can actually see a texture. The little hands were a little bit too tiny to add any detail to them, so I just didn't bother with it. But with this, I want to add a texture. So I'm going to add some line work going down the fronts of all the scales. And then once I have all the texture added to the foot, I'm happy with how everything looks. I'm going to put these in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 55 minutes. They're pretty thick, so you want to put them in for a long amount of time. And then once all of our clay is out of the oven and is cooled, we can start on our painting. So for the painting, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be primering everything a nice gray color. I'm going to start with the face first, and then we'll move on to the hands and feet. So once our first layer of gray is nice and dried, I'm going to start adding some shadowings around the eyes and the mouth. I'm just going to make it look like they're a little bit more sunken in by adding a darker color. Now I'm actually going to be taking kind of a pinkish purpley color, and I'm going to go over the portions of the face that are actually going to be kind of squishy and soft looking. So kind of around the eyes and different portions like that, the throat, I'm going to go over it with that color to make it have more of a kind of skin hue to it. Almost like you can kind of see the blood going under the skin. It would be kind of thinner there, so you would see a bit more of a skin tone. After that, I'm going to take a lighter gray and I'm going to go over the whole face. The only thing different is I'm going to have very little amount of paint in my brush, and I'm going to go over the face very lightly so the paint only catches on the more raised up portion. So it's kind of like giving it a whitewash. And then a few other colors I want to add to this are going to be other browns and greens, and just trying to make it look a little bit more natural. I want my T-Rex to have a darker kind of color palette, but I don't want it to be so dark that we can't see all the detail on the face. So I'm going to add little bits of different colors to kind of brighten different areas of the face and different portions of the clay pieces. just so that they look a little bit more defined. And then after we have all of our colors laid out, I'm going to take some white, I'm going to paint our teeth, and then I'm going to add some white highlights here and there. And then for the hands, we're going to be doing some very similar techniques that we did on the face with the hands. So we're going to start by painting everything gray. Once that's dried, we can add a shadowing. We're going to add a few pink colors here and there to the bottom of the hand, and then we can start painting the scales on top. I think for the scales, I want them to be both green and brown, so I'm going to start with a green first, and then I'm going to add some browns to the sides of the scales, and then blend everything together. And then lastly, I'm going to paint the claws a nice black color and add a white highlight to some of the scales. Okay, so now we're going to work on the back feet. So we're going to do the same thing with the hands and the face. We're going to add a gray, cover everything, get it dried, add some shadows. Now I did have a little bit of trouble by adding the little pinkish purple color to the bottom of the foot. I think I went too bright, so you will see me here and there kind of adjusting it. So it'll change colors a few different times until I like how it looks. So I went too bright and I slowly was trying to adjust it to make it look a bit more natural. Now I did do a whitewash over the front of the foot just a little bit to lighten it up a bit, and then I also started painting the scales very similar to the scales that we did on the hands. The only thing that I did differently was I didn't add as much brown to the scales, I kept them a bit more green. And then lastly, to go with the front feet, we're going to be painting our claws black, and then we're also going to be adding a white highlight here and there. We're going to let all of our clay pieces dry. Once the paint has dried, we're going to mix up some resin and apply it over everything. That's going to have to cure overnight to help protect the paint. So once that's done, we can start putting everything together. So what we need to do now is start working on the sewing. Okay, so this is the pattern that I drew out to make our T-Rex. I actually did a video sketching this out and a few other patterns, so I'll leave it linked down below if you want to see me actually draw this out and kind of explain how it goes together a bit more. But right now, this is what we're going to use to cut our fabric out. So the main fabric that I want to work with for the body of our T-Rex is going to be a sequence fabric to make it look like scales. So I have a nice black sequence and I'm going to be using this. The only problem is it's a little sheer, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a different layer of fabric that's just kind of a basic gray, and I'm going to pin it to the backing of our sequence fabric. I'm going to draw out the shape of our patterns on it. You can see that I already did that. And what we're going to do is we're going to end up taking our sewing machine and following all of these lines. That way we can combine these two layers of fabric together. Then we just need to cut them out after everything is sewn. Now I'm not going to do the whole body sequence. It's going to be a lot easier to have a little bit of a more plush fabric in certain spots. So the inside portion of the leg is just going to be a plush black, and we're going to be doing the same fabric for the arms. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the two side pieces for our body, the inside portion of our legs and the outside portion of our legs, and the same inside and outside portions of our arms, and we're going to sew down all of these. We're going to sew down the fronts of the arms and legs, and we're going to sew down the belly of the body. Once those pieces are put together and we have all of our clay pieces ready, we can start putting everything together. So I have a very simple wire frame. I'm not going to have wires for the arms. I want them to just dangle, so it's mainly for the back legs, the tail, and the neck. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the fabric for the body, I'm going to cut some holes for the wires for the legs to run through, and I'm going to slide this over our wire frame. After that, I'm going to take our clay head and I'm going to be gluing this to the wire for the neck. So I'm going to put a lot of glue into the back of the head and I'm going to hold it in place until everything dries. Then we can take the fabric for the neck and start gluing it around the base of the head. Now you'll notice that the fabric for the neck doesn't close all the way up, and that's because the head is larger. I normally do this and I'm completely aware that it's going to happen, so what I do is after I know the space in between that I need to fill, I make a little triangle of fabric and I fill that in. So I'm going to glue a triangle of fabric to the back of the head, and then we're going to sew this closed to kind of finish up the neck. After that, we're going to start closing up the body and stuffing it. So we're going to stuff as we close it up, and I'm going to start at the top of the head and I'm going to work my way until we get to the tip of the tail. Once the body is stuffed and closed up, we can start adding the legs to the frame. So I'm going to start with the back legs and then we'll move on to adding the arms. So you'll notice when I sketched everything out on our fabric, I also drew out little portions where the legs are going to go. I sewed these as well, that way I have nice little guidelines to follow. They're just out of a simple white thread, and I'm going to use this to follow as I sew the leg into place. So I'm going to take the fabric piece for the leg, I'm going to sew the under portion of the leg underneath the wire, kind of closer to the belly, and then the outer portion of the leg is going to be sewn over the wire following those lines. Once we have that in place, we can then take our clay legs and we're going to add these to the wire frame. So I'm going to take a 20 gauge wire and I'm going to start wrapping the wire that's sticking out of the back of the legs and the wire frame, and I'm going to combine them together by wrapping it with a 20 gauge. I'm going to do this to both of the legs, make sure they're nice and secure, and then I'm going to take the fabric for the legs and start gluing it around the base of the feet. I'm going to let this dry for a little bit, and then we need to stuff and close up the back of the legs. And then the arms are basically put on exactly the same as the legs. The only thing is there's no wires for it. So we're just going to sew the fabric for the arms onto the body. We have a little guideline for that as well. And then we're going to glue the arms into place onto the fabric and then close up the back after we lightly stuff it. Okay, so everything is all put together. It looks really good. It's a little bit too black and there's not much detail to the body. So what we're going to do is we're going to start painting our sequins. So the main thing that I want to do with the sequins is I want to add the colors that we have in the face into the body. That way it looks like it goes together. So we don't want the body to be a different color than the clay pieces. We want everything to kind of match and blend into each other. So since the sequence is black and the undertone fabric is gray, we have a good base to work with, so we mainly need to add our kind of browns, greens, and a little bit of our purple color to the belly. Also, you'll notice that our clay pieces are a little bit lighter than the fabric, so I did add some gray to it to kind of lighten that up as well. So I'm just going to take the colors that I want to use and I'm going to slowly add them to the body, just kind of roughly deciding where I want everything, blending them in. I really don't have much of a plan, I'm just putting colors where I think they're going to look nice. As I'm getting closer to finishing the painting for the body, I'm going to start adding some larger scales here and there. I think mainly down the back of the dinosaur and then a little bit onto the sides of his hips. So I'm just kind of defining larger scales. I'm going to add a white highlight here and there to kind of make it pop a bit more and just have it to where there's a bit more detail than just adding the colors. Now if you want, you can go super detailed like this on the whole body, but you're going to make it look a little bit messy if you don't do it right. So it's normally nice to just add hints of highlights and more detailed portions, and it kind of naturally blends together. So you don't have to cover the whole thing in individual scales, you can kind of just make the illusion that there's individual scales. Plus the sequence kind of helps with that.
Okay guys, and that's how I made a T-Rex. I had so much fun with this project, and if you guys have any other ideas for future dinosaur projects, leave them down below. Love seeing your guys' idea. I'm gonna have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop, so check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!